There's sort of this informal oppression Olympics. Who knows which group gets to be the most oppressed, and victims and oppressors. And if you write that into the Constitution, it's almost impossible to change. So some people will be born and they'll have the right to pick people who sit on this voice body. The judges will have all these new tools to override the elected legislature. It'll be harder to make laws. Anyone who thinks this is going to lead to unity is bonkers. It's going to be divisive.
G'day and welcome to the second episode of The Other Side Interviews, The Other Side Australia's interview show, which you'll find here on ADH TV every Tuesday night, streaming at 6 p.m. and of course available on demand whenever you want to watch. We're also on every Friday night, don't forget, at 8 p.m. for The Other Side Australia, our weekly news and commentary summary show where we bring you up to date with all of the best news and commentary from Australia and around the world at 8 p.m, streaming and of course also on demand anytime that you'd like to watch. And we're also on all good podcast platforms as well. Tonight we're going to be talking about The Voice with a very smart and special guest. The marketing strategy for the Voice to Parliament Yes campaign could probably be written in one sentence. Do not under any circumstances explain anything to anyone. The success of the campaign depends largely upon ensuring that you go to the referendum polling booths as ignorant of the details and what is really at stake as possible. They want us to read nothing more into that referendum question than racism is bad, yes or no. We must remain blissfully unaware of any of the implications of changing our constitution to enshrine different classes of citizens based upon race. And that is why this is so much more serious, this referendum. It's not just about whether or not we care about Aboriginal people. It's about changing our constitution, and that is big. So in the interest of making sure that we do our bit to get everyone as informed as possible before we vote, including myself, what better than to speak to a constitutional law expert? Our guest on The Other Side Interviews today is Professor James Allan. He is the Garrick Professor of Law at the University of Queensland Law School. He arrived in Australia in 2005 after spending 11 years teaching in New Zealand at the University of Otago and before that in Hong Kong. So, Professor Allan, given that history, where does that North American accent come from?
Well, thank you for having me, Damien. No, my secret in life is to be one step ahead of extradition. So I'm just happy to be here with you guys.
All right, well, thanks for joining us here. It is Anzac Day as we stream out, and I think it's a rather appropriate day for us to be talking about the Constitution. This is much more serious than just a nice vote on a token sort of institution, if you like, for Aboriginal people.
Yeah, this will fundamentally alter the Constitution. And what watchers need to remember is Australia has about the fourth oldest written constitution in the world. It's an immensely successful written constitution. You're really looking at the US, Canada, Switzerland, and then we're fourth or fifth.
Wow.
Because all of Europe, of course, went through 2 wars and they have very new constitutions. It's been a successful constitution, and one of the reasons it's successful, unlike many places in the world, is that voters have a say in changing the Constitution. That's not true in my native Canada. It's politicians who decide if you change the Constitution. Same in the US. You know, you need both houses of Congress and 3/4 of the state legislatures. Here, we followed the Swiss model, and every voter gets a say. I mean, if that were not true, we would be a republic today, and the Voice would be in place, because the political class, to a large extent, does not represent the voter in this country right now.
Right.
So we're all going to get a say, and it's very important that people understand how large the changes being suggested are. It will have, in my view, very bad consequences if this goes through.
What is, I mean, just to explain, because a lot of people, we hear about the Constitution and we understand that it's kind of the basis upon which our entire legal system is based, or the basic rule book for our country. What is it, do you think, that people need to know or understand about a constitution that they don't?
Okay, so look, you don't need a written constitution. Britain does not have a written constitution. Right. New Zealand does not. And they're incredibly successful places. They just have parliamentary sovereignty and elections, and they wouldn't be having this debate in Britain because you can't lock anything in. What a written constitution does is it locks things in. So it makes it harder than just passing a statute to change. So we basically have the most American constitution in the world, maybe the Philippines. And so we copied the Americans 120 years ago. So we have American federalism, one list, not two lists like Canada. We have American bicameralism. So we have a very strong upper house. Australians think that's normal. It is not normal in the democratic world. So in my native Canada or Britain, if you win an election, the upper house is appointed in Canada and it's appointed in Britain. They don't block anything. So if you win an election to cut the budget in Canada and you have a majority, you just do it. In this country, you have to go and bargain with a few people from Tasmania who have outsized families and lots of friends, and they get elected to the Senate. And it's exceedingly difficult to get anything done with our upper house. Now, some people say that protects liberty, but I just lived through 3 years of the most thuggish authoritarian sort of response to the pandemic, which I've never liked. And the Senate didn't do anything. They were worthless. So it's in that context that you add this body of a voice, which is undermining the notion of equal citizenship. We'll be one of the few democracies in the world where they're playing with words when they say it's not based on race. We can all accept the sort of scientific point that there's not very much genetic diversity amongst humans, not as much as amongst chimpanzees. And so really, in a sense, race doesn't make any sense scientifically. But you will be getting special entitlements based on things you're born with.
Yeah.
And that undermines liberal democracy, equal citizenship, the idea that you should be, what did Martin Luther King say? You ought to be judged based on the quality of your character and your achievements, not things over which you have no control. Like 20 years ago, that was just bog standard, every sort of half-decent person accepted that. Now you're being pushed into this road where everything's group rights, identity politics. There's sort of this informal oppression Olympics. Who knows which group gets to be the most oppressed, and victims and oppressors. And if you write that into the Constitution, it's almost impossible to change. So some people will be born and they'll have the right to pick people who sit on this voice body. The judges will have all these new tools to override the elected legislature. It'll be harder to make laws. Anyone who thinks this is going to lead to unity is bonkers. It's going to be divisive. Just look across at New Zealand. So for the first time ever, the Prime Minister is not funding the no case.
That's pretty extraordinary.
That's pretty extraordinary.
And
he's finessing it by saying, well, I'm not finessing the yes case either. Sorry, financing. He doesn't need to finance the yes case because every big corporate, and they're all full of wokesters, the money pouring into the yes case, they'll be able to finance themselves.
Yeah.
So, it's been a sort of backhanded way saying we're not going to finance either side. Every constitutional referenda up until now, both sides have been funded. So this is outrageous.
Yeah, it
really.
is outrageous.
It is
actually.
outrageous.
It's appalling. Yeah. And look, I mean, just coming back to this idea of the implications of a change to the Constitution versus just changing a law or just creating another Aboriginal advisory body.
Because we've got loads of them, dozens and dozens and dozens.
Well, they're all doing a great
Yeah.
job. So we should have one more. Yeah. What is it that makes that difference? I mean, it comes down to the fact that if something is enshrined in the Constitution, then the High Court is limited in what it can interpretation.
It's opened up. So the actual wording that's been proposed is that this voice body, nobody knows how it's going to be chosen. You can get the details later. And the wording is may make representations to Parliament and the Executive on matters relating to Aboriginal and Torres Islander Strait peoples. So may make representations. There's lots of scope for the High Court to turn that into a constitutional right to be consulted. Not just Parliament, but every executive decision. So that's every bureaucratic body. You can imagine the rent seeking that's going to happen. You can imagine the sort of sclerotic ability. My guess, and John O'Sullivan had a law that said every body in the world that's not explicitly right-wing over time becomes left-wing. The activist class will capture this body. And I think one of the reasons Labor's not too worried about this is it's a bit like the Senate. If you want to be a big spending government, just spend like crazy. You never have a problem getting through the Senate. Because these little independents just go, oh yeah, more money for... If you want to cut back on the budget and do something really restrained, it's very difficult to get that through the Senate. Well, it's going to be like that on steroids with this voice body. Its sort of baseline set of views will be sort of right there with the Green Party. And so when Labour gets in, they won't really have too much problem getting their more spending, more identity politics laws through the, they'll line up with the voice body. Anything that a Conservative Party wants to do, well, the voice body isn't going to like it. Now, they don't have a veto, but they can slow things down considerably. And who knows the extent to which the High Court will take this may make representations, turn it into a constitutional right to be consulted. How long do they have to be consulted? And you can imagine how sclerotic this is going to become.
Now, people are going to say to you, "Oh, you're just a right-wing nutjob racist." They'll throw every nasty phrase they can, and they'll say, "Oh, you're just picking on minute details, and these minute details are going to be amplified." They're saying they're going to be amplified in a way that we can't predict they're going to be amplified. We can predict, sort of, can't we?
We can predict. So I brought this so I got the wording right. So a couple of years ago, in a case called Love, this is with the Constitution we have right now. There were some, one was New Zealand born, I think one was from Papua New Guinea, and they had moved to Australia, but they had not become citizens, and they had committed criminal offences.
These are Indigenous Aboriginal Australians?
They claim to have Indigenous links. And so when they got out of jail, it's quite standard for governments to deport people who aren't citizens after they've been convicted of criminal offences. They've spent their time in jail. And these two went to the High Court and argued that they can't be deported. Remember, they're not citizens.
They committed the crimes in Australia?
In Australia, can't be deported. And it's because and so this was the Love case. And the judges, and I've never really read a case like this, and I've wasted 25 years of my life reading high constitutional cases from Canada and the US and Britain and here. But
so we don't have to.
Yes,
we need to appreciate you more, James. We need to appreciate you.
So the High Court majority justices, they grounded their ratio. So this is what they said. The reasoning was, and it came to whether, these were concepts such as, and I'm not making this up, otherness, deeper truth, a connection to Australia that is spiritual and metaphysical. At this point, you're wanting to vomit, but I will keep going. And they combined this all together to say that our Constitution now recognizes, and this is a quote, that Indigenous peoples can and do possess certain rights and duties that are not possessed by, cannot be possessed by, non-Indigenous peoples of Australia. And they go on, different considerations apply to a person of Aboriginal descent.
Hang on.
This is incredible, right?
Hang on.
Incredible.
Just go back to that last sentence and read that for me one more time, James. That is outrageous.
They concluded, this was the majority.
Are we allowed to say it's outrageous? I don't know if we're allowed to criticize. Is it contempt of court to criticize our judges?
No, you can criticize. You can criticize the reasoning.
Not sure anymore.
They use these sort of deconstructionist, bizarre notions to come up with the view that Indigenous peoples can and do possess certain rights and duties that are not possessed by, cannot be possessed by non-Indigenous peoples of Australia. Now, this is without the voice body. Let me tell you, when the voice body comes in, who knows what could happen? It's going to be, who was the American vice president who said there's known unknowns and there's unknown unknowns? I can tell you, though, there's a half-decent chance in 10 or 15 years that it will become they'll use it as a basis to discover a sort of implied freedom, sort of like they did in this country back in the early 90s. So I lived through Canada bringing in the Charter of Rights back in 1982. I was just starting law school. And everyone said, look, we're going to put in this Section 33, which gives an override to the elected parliament in Canada if the judges get out of hand. All the people pushing it said that. Right. After it came in, those very same people said, you can't stand up to the judges. That would be inappropriate. In 40 years in Canada, 41 now, not one single time, like zero, it rhymes with the 5th Roman emperor, right? The pyromaniac. Not one single time has the federal parliament ever invoked it. And that's going to be the same here. They're going to say, oh, it's easy for parliament. They can just stand up to the voice body. Well, the Labour won't want to stand up to the voice body. Yeah. And we've all seen that the Liberal Party has the backbone of an amoeba, if you're lucky, a squid. The chances that they will stand up to the voice body are really, really low. And voters know that going in. So why would you give this? And it's a lot of power you'll be giving to this body. You don't know how it's going to be constituted. You don't know who's going to get on it. That's all. We don't need any details, says Mr. Albanese.
And they have the right. That's the other wording that's in there, is that the government, the parliament rather, has the right to determine the makeup of this body and change it at any time it likes.
Yeah, the third clause says Parliament shall, subject to this Constitution, have power to make laws with respect to matters relating to this voice body. But the thing is, subject to this Constitution means the top judges will have an overseeing role, as they do for the rest of the Constitution. And again, I mean, that case I just read out to you, the majority, 3 out of the 4 majority judges were appointed by George Brandis and the Liberal Party. I mean, there's not even a good track record in this country of the right of centre Liberal Party making sane appointments to the High Court. The last 2 were better.
Yeah, so it's not like the United States where you have this more or less a bit of a balance going on.
But that's new in the U.S., right?
Right.
That's very recent, where the Republican Party finally realized. Because if you want some of the most left-wing groups in society right now, it's the lawyerly caste. Go down to a big Sydney law firm, walk in, and you'll be in one of the most woke workplaces in Australia. And these are and it relates to the way we're educating kids in university law schools. You hardly can find a conservative. I say this as one, but the number of openly conservative law school academics is exceedingly small. There's 36 law schools plus in this country, and I think you could count on one machine operator's hand the number of legal academics who are openly against the voice. You
mentioned once, I think, when I saw you speak, that Queensland University Law School is considered to be the most conservative in Australia?
I would say that's right. We might have a fifth of our faculty who would, my guess is, would vote coalition. So that makes us massively more. Like viewpoint diversity is collapsing around the Anglosphere in universities. So there's lots of empirical evidence for this in the US and Canada, Britain. It's harder in Australia because we don't, campaign finance contributions isn't public information here. It is in the US. But I can tell you from personal experience that the number of openly conservative, and by that I mean you're just prepared to say out loud that you vote for the coalition. The numbers keep going down.
Which doesn't necessarily make you conservative either.
No, I mean,
you could just be a classical liberal.
Well, half those people would have voted for Malcolm, who's about as left wing as you can get.
Right.
So it's not good.
Yeah. So okay, so we don't have that diversity. We've got diversity of everything else enforced upon us.
The diversity bureaucracy does not believe in diversity. They believe in diversity of reproductive organs and diversity of skin pigmentation. And what they do is it's just classic identity politics. You look at the percentage in the wider population, and then you look at some desirable job, university, spot. It's always desirable jobs, right? And then you say we need the same percentage in the desirable job as exists in the wider population. No one says, 95% of jobs in society where people die on the job because they're dangerous jobs are held by men. And so we need to get a lot more women in these jobs so they can die. It would be ridiculous, right?
Right.
But they never look at those kind of jobs. It's always spots on corporate boards or university professorships.
Yes, yeah.
And it's a sort of watered down version of Marxism. You give up on equality of opportunity where you let everyone compete equally on merit. And you go down the road of, well, they call it equity, but what they really mean is equality of outcome. So you're this percentage of the group in the wider population, you need that percentage in this particular area. It's really malign or malevolent thinking.
I ran a national office for a very woke multinational corporation, and I remember thinking, going for 50-50 gender equity in a board might be a desirable thing, but you're probably not kicking into sexism unless you've got less than 25% of one gender over another. And it's not always about sexism. It's just one of the variables.
One of the core tenets of woke thinking is that you imagine that every group in society has the same potentiality and the same interests and desires, and so the only way to explain differences is discrimination, right? Whereas there's loads of empirical evidence that as groups, women have different preferences than men, right? And so it's not surprising that you find a smaller percentage of women who want to do really dangerous jobs, or a smaller percentage of men who want to be nurses. And the idea is that you are part of a group. You're not this individual with your own sort of outlooks, desires, druthers, whatever you want to call it. It's malign thinking. We never used to do that. We used to just base things on merit. And law schools right now, almost 2/3 of the students are women. There's going to be no problem with women representation down the road. They just want to fix it now. But when you fix it now, you hammer people based on merit. It's a bad idea. I don't like
yeah,
any quotas for anything. I think merit should, now that makes me very rare, right? Universities around the world today are just big, giant affirmative action factories.
Yeah. And it's not working, as we can see.
Well, it's not working.
Healthy.
It's woking, but it's not working.
No, exactly. So, all right. So, coming back to the voice, this is another criticism that people have of it, that it is in fact an extension of wokeism, and that it's going to set a precedent that will have impacts more broadly in terms of Marxist-style identity politics being implemented in other ways.
Well, how it plays out, no one really knows, but it's hard to see how it's going to play out in any good way, since no one can point to any likely good consequence. The only good consequence anyone ever points to is symbolism. You know, we can all be skeptical of that.
I think it was Jacinta Price in her maiden speech who said, you know, I've had my gut full of being symbolically recognised.
It's so you are seeing that some people in society, not because of anything they do, but just how they were born, will have an extra say on everybody else. And so if you don't want to call that race-based, it is sort of race-based, but if you think, okay, technically there is no such thing scientifically as race, based on characteristics with which you were born and have no control over, some people in society will get one set of entitlements and others will get another set. Now, that hasn't worked out well anywhere. You know, even India after World War II, that had a lot of affirmative action quota type thinking, they've gone away from it, right? It's not healthy. I don't really see how it leads to reconciliation. It's going to lead to bitterness.
Yeah.
And when this voice body, and I'm not saying that the judges will be activists in the first day or two. In Canada, it took the judges after 1982, 5, 6, 7, 8 years. A decade from now, the judges will start using this new provision in the Constitution. And by the way, it's going to get its own chapter in the Constitution. So we've had 44 constitutional referenda in Australia's history. 36 failed, 8 passed. And in none of those other ones were they proposing that will give the Constitution a new chapter. And I point that out for any lawyers watching, because when our High Court has become what I would call activist or adventurist, or they usurp the power of Parliament, it's often been on the basis, separation of powers doctrine, the implied freedom of political communication. It's been on the basis that, well, it's how the Constitution is structured and how the chapters look. So we're going to give them their own chapter. We're not even just talking about changing one section. We're going to give them their own chapter. There's no way this isn't going to be picked up on by some future judge and used in some way that undermines the power of Parliament.
Well, I wouldn't want to question the political neutrality of our judges in the future. I'm sure they'll all be very, very balanced.
It's not
given
even
what you said about the law schools.
It's not even political neutrality. It's how they see the world. It's how they believe.
Well, worldview.
Yeah, they all think they're morally, superior beings. Everyone tends to think their moral views are better than anyone else's. We're all born that way. But if you say to someone, what are the odds after 3.7 billion years of life on Earth that you're the pinnacle of moral evolution?
Yeah, probably not.
It's pretty unlikely.
Pretty unlikely.
We know in 100 years people will look back and go, what a buffoon. It doesn't matter what your views are. Now, if you think that that's because, people's moral sentiments change over time and you're no better than your grandfather, that's my view, fine. But if you think somehow you're morally great, your moral antennae vibrate at just the perfect moral frequency, and your great-grandparents are wicked beings, it's a weird way to see the world, and you cannot cash that out in any sort of plausible way.
It sort of is the way we're teaching kids to see the world today.
It's overly moralized, and it's just, we are lucky. We live in one of the best places in the world. You're just kidding yourself if you think there's ever been a better place in the world to live than the West. Let's say if you're a woman. Through human history, this is the best time to be alive.
Or if you're an Indigenous person.
Yes. Now, what happens is people point to flaws, and there are real flaws, but then they generalize and say, well, because of those flaws, we have the worst civilization going. Well, you got to be kidding yourself.
Yeah.
Pick where would women rather live, right? Or even if you're just talking about colonial enterprises, I can tell you the best place to be colonized was by Britain. Just look at Belgium. Just look at France. Just look at Spain. Just look at Portugal. And so, you have to be a little bit nuanced. Everything in history is pluses and minuses. Everyone's always making calls for the least bad outcome. Right. So the least bad outcome here is to get this voice body rejected, and rejected massively. And as you said in your introduction, one of the ways they're advancing this cause is basically to call everyone a racist who's against it. And
which is preposterous.
It's
bullying.
Preposterous.
It's everything that they say.
You've got Noel Pearson saying it. You've got top KCs saying it, and it's just patently untrue.
I've been shocked and somewhat appalled by what Noel Pearson has said. I thought he had a bit more intellect than that. It's pathetic.
The technical term for that is ad hominem arguments, where you can't really argue based on the merits of the case. So you just go, Damien, you're a bad person.
Attack the person, attack the human. Yeah. Well, I think in that case, I mean, to pick up on what you said there about we need to reject this, not just win, we need to reject it largely, hugely, enormously, send a signal that, because it really is kind of a vote on this whole woke ideology of identity politics.
Look, if this goes through, the next thing will be a treaty. There'll be this so-called truth-telling commission. It's all lined up for what's going to happen. They don't want to talk about the next steps. On its own, this body, I mean, if you wanted to recognize that Australia, is a country that began with Aboriginal, you could put something in the preamble. Nobody's against sort of bland recognition in that sense, and they're conflating that kind of recognition with a separate political body. It will be political, that has very large amounts of power, that will make lawmaking sclerotic, at least if you're a conservative who wants to cut spending and that sort of thing, that will lead to rent seeking. This body, this voice body, has nothing to do with just this vapid notion of recognition.
Someone said to me, it's actually this is a body that will enshrine left-wing thinking and the neo-Marxist identity politics to a certain extent.
Well, it won't enshrine it explicitly, but in practice, that's what's going to happen.
But it's going to be a separate body, and all it's going to do is be filled with people of that political, forget the race, it's the political persuasion.
The activist caste will take it over. Now, Damien, you might be able to explain why Labour would be in favour of that. I mean, I'm struggling to think why Labour would want this kind of body that makes it impossible.
Why would you? It's possible for conservatives to push, or anybody right of
And it's not just conservatives versus Labour. It's people who believe in democracy. I'm a big Democrat. I don't like giving too much power to judges or international bodies or international law. Over time, the best decisions come from counting everyone equally, giving us all a vote, and sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. You win on tax rates, you lose on how your border's policed, whatever. Over time, there's no better system than democracy, but
it assumes an educated public, or an informed public.
The worst problem is that the elites in the West in the last 20 years have decided that they know better than the average voter, that they know better than your plumbers and secretaries, and so there's a disdain for the average voter. You saw it with the Brexit. These deplorable people is what Hillary Clinton called them. And I see this voice referendum.
It's so elitist, ironically.
It's shaping up to look a lot like the Brexit vote, where the elites in Australia, the corporate class, and the upper level bureaucrats are all going to be in favour, and the sort of deplorable class, the outsider caste, there's exceptions. They're going to be against. And I said from day one that this would lose. I hope I'm right. I think it will lose. I think that when people get into the ballot box, they'll say, I'm not voting for that. Now, the problem is that Albanese's just not funding the no case. So it's hard to, everyone out there has to get out and say to their friends, this is a rigged process. And we have to get out
there needs to share this video far and wide.
We need to get out there. But I think you can't even trust the polls to some extent, because given that you're being called a racist if you're against, you don't really want to tell pollsters that I'm thinking of voting no. So we can bet on a 2 to 3 to 4% slippage from the polls. People will remember that when they first mooted a republic in this country, the polls were 71% in favor of the republic. And then when people heard the no case, it lost in every single state. It even lost in Victoria. If you can't win a referendum in the most left-wing state in this country, I don't know what. So I think if they'd funded the no case, it would have been slaughtered. Since they're not funding the no case, I still think it's going to lose. But we all have to get out there, and you just can't let people cow you by calling you a racist. There's nothing racist about being against this body.
No, there
nothing
isn't.
At all. It's just sound It's a sound desire to live in a democracy where everyone's treated the same.
And Australians are not racist people generally. We are a very welcoming, kind, considerate people. And we have a very welcoming, kind, considerate culture.
There's always outliers everywhere, but come
of
off
course,
it. I mean, everyone knows.
Yeah. So given that, we aren't a racist people, that we do spend actually quite a considerable amount of money on Aboriginal support services. I think the figure is that Indigenous Australians, if you take all of government spending, depending on how you look at it, it's 1.5 to 2 times the amount of federal government spending goes to Indigenous Australians per capita versus non-Indigenous Australians per capita. That's a significant difference that indicates a great willingness to hand over our tax to support Aboriginal people, because everybody really likes the culture and they like Aboriginal people.
I don't want to play
There's no ill will here, right?
You're totally right, Damon. Look, Gary John's a former cabinet minister in the Keating government, so he was Labour. But no more. He's written a great book on Aboriginal affairs. It came out last year, I think, maybe this year, and he goes through all those statistics you do. He's also against this voice body, but he points out that it's not a problem with spending. We spend a huge amount. There's a huge difference in Aboriginal outcomes between Aboriginals who've moved to sort of urban areas, and their outcomes are quite close to non-Aboriginal outcomes. Where you have disastrous social statistics in terms of teenage pregnancies, drunkenness, it's in remote areas. And the problem is it's very hard to live a first world lifestyle where you're so far away, there's no jobs, there's no opportunities, and I don't know how you overcome that. I know that when we sort of dealt with native title and group land rights, it's hard to run a modern economy where you don't own your land, but you're part of a group that owns it. It kills incentive, right?
You're not going to want to invest in...
It's like I've worked really hard and earned this, and now I have to share it with my entire family.
Or if I work hard in the future, then I'm going to have to share it, or it's unclear what I own and what I don't own. I mean, it's really a tenet of
it's
liberal
very
democracy.
different. Yeah, I mean, and it's successful. Because
I do want to talk about land rights, because you don't get to talk to a constitutional lawyer every day.
Well, you're lucky. You probably, if you have, if you can't sleep or something, just give me a call.
Okay. There is a link here, some say, between this voice body and an ultimate native title goal. Now, native title, the first case was Mabo.
I mean, I don't really care about Mabo because for this reason, it's not a constitutional case; it's a common law case. And if Parliament wanted to, it could enact, and they did immediately afterwards, to some extent, narrow it down. So legislation trumps cases unless the cases are linked to the Constitution.
Yeah.
And one of the problems with the voice body is all of a sudden you're going to get cases that are linked to the Constitution, and once they're linked to the Constitution, Parliament can't do anything about it. It becomes preeminent.
Right.
So if they wanted to enact some statutory body and call it the voice, I think it would be a waste of money. I don't think it would have particularly good consequences, but I wouldn't be worried about it too much. I mean, we had ASIC, John Howard dismantled it, but we've had all sorts of bodies. Why is it they're so desperate to have this in the Constitution and not just enact it through statute? Because it'll become a rung on which judicial cases will make it impossible for Parliament to respond. And we know going in, given the complete invertebrate nature of conservative political parties, it will be there forever. You will never have another referendum to get it out. And so you get one pick on this, and if you want this country to be really bad for your kids, then vote yes.
So that's the difference. The difference is we're changing the Constitution. When you change the Constitution, the High Court can refer to the Constitution to say if they create a doctrine like the implied freedom, which I think they just made up, but if they do that, there's nothing Parliament can do in response. You'll get this sort of proportionality analysis come in, and you can just imagine, it won't happen right away, but just look at the kind of kids coming out of law school, really smart ones. They've been indoctrinated and they're very left-leaning. And down the road, they'll see themselves as doing God's work, and they will use this as a tool. And it's very dangerous. Let me play one of those law students, which you probably face every single day.
You're a bit old.
I'm a bit old. Sorry, I'll just, when I say play, I'll do my best. But basically, they're going to say that, Aboriginal people do, as the Love case indicates that we spoke about, do have a special, inalienable sort of right to this land because they were here first. Is that a moral concept that has received a legal tick anywhere in the world, as far as you know, or is it valid, or what is the counter to that argument?
There's lots of statutory initiatives to improve the plight of Native Indians in Canada, or Aboriginal people here, or Maori in New Zealand. But if you go too far down the group rights basis, and you're seeing it across the Tasman with New Zealand and the Three Waters Initiative, and actually saying that we're going to see in New Zealand, some of the Labour Party initiatives said we're going to see society in terms of two groups, the 17% who are Maori and the 83% who aren't, and we're going to treat them as equal bodies. Now, this is not sustainable. There's no possible way that you, in a liberal democracy, that you can say one group, which represents under a fifth of the population, will be 50-50 with another group that represents massively more. It's not sustainable. It's very divisive. I'm not saying that's going to come here, but it possibly might. And
so you end up with the Lydia Thorpe mentality of you're a colonizer and you're always a colonizer, right? You're never the guy who helped. I don't
believe in apologizing for something I didn't do.
Yeah.
I mean, the idea that you have some link genetically back to people who made decisions too, it's ridiculous. It's a weird way of seeing the world. It's almost like going back to feudal times or something. It's garbage. You are where you are when you're born, and your goal is to sort of have the best life you can and be the best sort of person. And if you're a nice person, you treat people based on their character and their achievements.
I always say God, or if you're an atheist, history put us here now.
I played university.
This is where we're at.
Varsity basketball in Canada, and most people who play varsity basketball are black, because they're better at it. Nobody said, look, we need to have 70% of the team white because this, it's group rights. It's ridiculous. Yeah. If you're better at something, then you should get the rewards at it, because you want to, in the long term, we all benefit when rewards follow merit and hard work, because there's a progressive tax system and you want people working hard, and if they come up with something that helps all of us scientifically or in some corporate sense, they have to pay taxes, and that flows to all the rest of us. You don't want to undermine the initiative and the hard work and the link between work and outcome and benefits by just saying, okay, well, we don't care about your merit. We need somebody from this group. Can I have a disabled homosexual woman here for this group? It's ridiculous thinking. You treat people based on their sort of character and their achievements and how hard they work. Yep. And you'd know that as an employer. That's the kind of person people want to work with.
Yep.
And we are in the West right now. Well, as an employer,
I got to tell you, I'm very careful about setting up a business in this country.
The labor laws are insane. Yeah. And I've never seen we're the last country in the world to have, civil servants deciding what your wage is going to be. I just think that's bonkers.
So I think this idea, also, if you go back 200 years, I mean, we've all got ancestors, most of us have got ancestors who suffered at the hands of somebody's colonial horror or just a war.
There are very few 100%.
This is planet Earth. It's not a nice place.
It always seems weird to me that someone says, 7 of my great grandfathers oppressed the 8th one.
Yeah.
Look, here's the simple truth.
Therefore, I got to get that.
That's right. If you take the right kind of philosophy course, someone will say to you, the odds of you existing are infinitesimally small. You needed one of those billions of sperms to hit this egg. You needed these two parents to meet. Everything had to go right for you to be born. And so you get one shot at it. And I grew up in a house where, the idea was, well, just don't complain. Don't play a victim. You don't do well in life if you see yourself as a victim. You're very lucky to be living in Australia. You've got all these opportunities. Of course, there are people out there who are smarter than you, better looking than you, obviously not better looking than you and I.
No, of course not.
But there are people out there better. And, you can't expect to have won the lottery of life on every front.
That's right. Yes.
Some people out there are just going to be better than you at everything. So you do the best you can. Nobody is poor in this country who works hard. There's
when you've lived in a really poor country, and I have, you realise that nobody in Australia is really
stop
poor
playing the victim. I went to state schools. I didn't know
people we need to help, but
I didn't know anyone who went to a private school till I got to university at Queens, and then loads. But I never saw myself as. I just figured, this is the way the world goes. You work hard, and hopefully you can find your way home when you drink too much. These kind of things, but
Well, you're a lot smarter than me, but I'm not sitting here saying damn, you need to pretend to be dumber so I don't look so dumb. I'm saying, I wish I was as smart as you, and I'm glad you live. I'm glad you're around because I can benefit from
nobody says that at university. Let me tell you, nobody says that about me at university. Luckily, they don't read The Spectator where I write every week, and they don't read The Australian, so I'm okay. As long as I stay out of The Guardian, I should be all right.
Yep.
Can I do a quick plug for this?
Yeah, I was just about to say, let's talk about your book.
Latest book came out last year out of the U.S. It's just, as it happens by chance, it's about...
The Age of Foolishness.
Well, yeah, which is about how constitutional thinking in the Anglosphere has gone crazy in the last 30 or 40 years.
Right.
By that I mean, everywhere except Ireland. I don't know anything about Ireland, but the U.S., Canada, Australia, New Zealand, the big Anglosphere countries, judges have become more powerful, and that's not a good thing in my view. Democratic decision making has become less influential, and the voice would make it even more, would make that trend accentuate, so less input by Parliament. And so I just go through that, and it's written for the layman, or for all of you people out there who don't like layperson.
James, it's been great talking to you. I'd love to have you back, and we'll talk about the Age of Foolishness sometime in the future.
That's very kind. We'll do it at night and have a few drinks.
Yeah, that'd be lovely.
Thank you very much, Damien.
Great to finally meet you in person.
Thanks to your team here. They're great
They're
people.
fantastic.
Yeah,
they're great people. They really are. And ADH is a great network. So let's spread the word, folks. If you can like our videos, but more importantly than liking stuff is sharing it, because that really helps to get that multiplier effect that we really need to happen if we're going to get these important voices heard, like Professor James Allan. And that's what really this interview show is about. On the other side, every Tuesday night, 6 p.m. here on ADH TV, we stream, but we're up and on demand anytime that you want to watch. And also good for podcast driving, particularly the interview show. If you want to have a listen, you can check us out on The Other Side Interviews on all major podcast platforms. And don't forget, every Friday night, our main show, which is The Other Side Australia, and it's also a platform for various voices. We go out and we look for the other side. We look for the people who are saying different things, and we pull that together for you in a nice 40-minute summary show, which, as well as giving you those opinions from the other side, will also inform you on the news of the week. So you can use it as a weekly catch-up tool if you want to keep up with the stuff that people are talking about. Comes out every Friday night, so you can look smart for the weekend if you want to join us here on ADH at 8 p.m. for live streaming, and also always on demand. So I'll see you Friday night for The Other Side Australia, and next Tuesday for The Other Side Interviews. Thanks for being with us.